His miraculous power to heal amazed. His power to feed thousands excited. And his power to raise the dead proved he was more than a prophet. These feats were signs that demonstrated Jesus was the Son of God.
There have always been people who claim to be able to perform miracles. But when Jesus started performing his miracles, they were so numerous and the quality was just so impressive. And when I read about those miracles, I get a certain picture in my head. My mind fills in the blanks with what's familiar to me.
As we read through the Bible, a lot of us have preconceived ideas about these locations or how these events actually took place. By traveling around, I think that going to a lot of these places will clear up a number of those misconceptions.
It's important to remember that Jesus' official ministry really kicked off with a very simple but potent miracle in Cana, where Jesus turns the water into wine. And from that point onward, the miracles increase in intensity, and what he's doing is so different from what anyone else claims to be able to do. The crowds just continue to grow. We're wanting to talk about the miracles of Jesus, and there's a place over here on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee that you're taking us. What miracle did Jesus perform over here?
This is the miracle of Jesus casting the demons into the swine, a site called Curzy. We know this event happened directly on the Sea of Galilee because we know that the swines ran down a steep embankment and into the sea. Jeremy, we've come to the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee and we've kind of climbed the hill a little bit. And I did that because I wanted us to read a passage. They came to the other side of the sea, the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. And of course we know this story as the story in which Jesus has compassion on this gentleman and heals him of his demons.
Now, this is a really famous story. This is the man that is possessed by Legion, and the other gospel accounts let us know that there were 2 men that were healed that day. It was during that trip over here from Capernaum when Jesus calmed the storm. And as soon as he finished healing this man, they asked him to leave, and so he sailed right back. He came over here for 2 Gentile men across a stormy sea, which I think speaks a lot to the compassion of Jesus.
We know that he cast the demons out of the man and into a herd of pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned into the sea. And of course you can kind of picture that whole story happening right here. It's not just a cliff that goes to the edge of the water. There was a considerable distance, at least a few hundred yards, between the bottom of the embankment and the water's edge.
That just changes how I've always imagined that. That herd of swine would have rushed down this really steep hill, gone across this flat area, and then run into the sea. Normally, an animal has a sense of self-preservation. And so even though it may have survived running down a steep embankment, it would have stopped in the plain, but these thousands of pigs didn't, which further attests to the fact that there was something controlling them other than themselves. Jesus performed signs that demonstrated that he was from God, that he had control over everything and everyone, even spiritual forces like demons. You know, the details at the beginning of Mark's account of this event are really helpful because they let us know the desperate condition that this man was in. He was separated from his family. He was living in the graveyard. He was basically living as a dead person. He was out of his mind, out of control. He was hurting himself, showing these signs of deep distress. And Jesus takes care of all of those things. So when the people come back out, he's sitting, he's clothed, he's in his right mind. It would have been a startling and a shocking sight for the people to come out of town and to see the aftermath of those animals drowning and to see someone who they had tried to help for so long, finally healthy and in his right mind. And something that's emphasized down through the text is the begging that takes place. When Jesus gets there and Legion recognizes Jesus, he begs Jesus to spare him. And then later on, you have the townspeople begging Jesus to leave them because they're afraid of him. And then you have the man who's been healed begging to go with Jesus, the man who's finally helped him. And I think what Mark is trying to help us do in that chapter is to challenge us with how are we going to respond? Are we going to be so afraid of him that we beg him to leave like they did? Or are we going to respond as the healed man and beg to stay close to him because of what he does for us?
Jeremy, we're standing on top of the archaeological site called Et Tel, and many people think this is ancient Bethsaida. Now, there's a number of different places that could be Bethsaida. In fact, there's one right down in the valley that they're digging on right now. We came up here because I wanted to read a passage to you, and it says, "On their return, the apostles told him all that they had done, and he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida." And this is the beginning of the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And that probably took place right here in this plain of Bethsaida, just down below the hill where we are now.
Now, it's helpful to put that feeding in context. The disciples had come back to tell him all that they had done. They had been sent out on that limited commission. But the other piece of news that they brought to him was that Herod Antipas had just killed his cousin John the Baptist down at his Black Fortress. And what the other Gospels reveal is that hurt, and he was trying to get away to a desolate place to let them recharge and also for him to grieve the loss of his cousin. And so they came across the sea over here toward Bethsaida, and the crowds saw that he was heading this way, and so they ran around the north side of the Sea of Galilee and beat him here. We need to appreciate the humanity of Jesus. He sees all of these people who aren't just there for the teaching, but he sees people that need help, they need healing. And it says that he had compassion on them. And so despite how he was feeling in the moment, he spent that day taking care of thousands of other people. And so Jesus, in this moment where he should have been grieving and having some privacy, was surrounded by thousands of people and still took the time to care for them, to heal them, and by the end of the day, to miraculously feed 5,000 of them.
And Jesus looks at Philip and asks Philip, "Where do we go and buy food for these people?" And I think the reason he pointed Philip out was because Philip was from Bethsaida. Philip would know where to get food for these people. Philip's response is, "We don't have the money to buy enough food for all these people." And of course, we know that he grouped them into specific groups and then asked for food. And one boy produced 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So imagine, if you will, 5,000 people spread out across this plain right here. And Jesus performed the miracle where he was able to feed them all.
Now, John's emphasis is that Jesus is actually able to miraculously produce food for people, very similar to the way that God produced manna for the Israelites in the Old Testament. And so, not just performing a miraculous sign, but that sign pointed to the fact that he was connected to the Yahweh of the Old Testament. It would have reminded them of Moses and the wandering of the Israelites and the fact that God miraculously provided food and manna for them. This man from Nazareth is doing what happened in the days of Moses. And Moses prophesied that a prophet would come like him, and they would have made that connection.
After Jesus was rejected at Nazareth, he moved to Capernaum and really set up this city as kind of his home base for his ministry in this area.
A lot of the miracles that are recorded in the gospel either took place here or just outside of here. When he walked across the Sea of Galilee at night, he was coming from the opposite side of the sea, coming toward Capernaum. And if he hadn't intercepted the boat, he would have passed by them and come here to this harbor. We mentioned the casting out of the demons into the swine. Well, that started here and stopped here. He took off from Capernaum, and then when he came back to Capernaum.
Capernaum was a small village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Probably had a few hundred people in it. And given the miracles that are recorded for us in the Gospels, of all the things that Jesus did there, obviously he would have been well known in the community. Anytime he came to Capernaum, people would have known about it.
Now, there are a lot of miracles that we could talk about, but there's one that I think is extra special. It's over in Luke chapter 8. And as Jesus is coming into town, Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, has a daughter across town who is very, very ill. And so he sends word asking for Jesus to get to him and try to help his daughter. And as he comes through town, crowds start to surround him. And in the midst of all of that is when a woman who has had a flow of blood for 12 years and has been spending all of her livelihood, gone to all of these doctors to try to take care of that, comes up to Jesus and she just touches the edge of Jesus' garment. And as soon as she does that, she feels within herself that she's been healed. And Jesus stops and makes a comment about it and gives her opportunity to acknowledge what she's done. And in that interlude, the ruler's daughter actually dies. And by the time he gets there, the mourners are already there. But of course he goes in and he raises her. There's just so much about the facts in that miracle that testify to Jesus and who he is and how compassionate he is. You have this woman who for 12 years has been ceremonially unclean. It's hindered her ability to be social, and she has exhausted every possible way to heal herself. She is hopeless. There's nothing left. She's so desperate that she's willing to try to sneak a miracle from Jesus because her condition is such that it's a very delicate matter. And what Jesus does at first glance seems kind of cruel. He draws attention to her. It says the crowd was kind of jostling him and he asks, "Who touched me?" And his disciples are a little indignant. There are all these people. What do you mean, who touched you? When he mentions it again, she comes forward. She tells him everything that happened and he says, "Go in peace, your faith has made you well." And what he did, you think about her situation. If she had left that crowd without Jesus having done that, she would have felt like she had stolen something from God. And she wouldn't have been as apt to have shared the news about it, and she would have felt guilt over that. Instead, Jesus provided her an opportunity to be open and to come clean about it and to be more public with it and walk away feeling like she had been granted a gift, not that she had taken anything. The way that he interacted with her was so compassionate. There's just so many details. I always think about that miracle when I think about Capernaum. But unfortunately, after him living there and doing so much, Capernaum is one of the towns that he pronounces a woe on when he's done with his ministry because it says they didn't believe, which is just so shocking to think, look at all that he said and all that he did in that spot, and the town didn't believe. And I think that's a warning to us that we need to pay attention. And we need to make sure that we pay attention to what Jesus says and what he does so that we don't end up with the same woe pronounced upon us.
We're actually driving through Cana. This is one of the two possible locations of the first miracle that Jesus did, where he turned the water into wine at the wedding feast.
The Gospels record that Cana is really where Jesus' ministry got started with that very first miracle. So what we saw at the Israel Museum was some large stone jars that were used for holding water for ritual purification.
That's right.
It was most likely that Jesus converted that water into wine in Cana.
I don't think we have time to stop here today, but it's interesting still to drive through this area. It gives you a perspective of where it's located in relation to other cities and villages nearby.